Good morning, All Saints, and those of you who are streaming. I want to welcome you to our forum today. For all of you who are new or visiting with us today, we do have some visitors. I'd like you to know that there is a green contact sheet at the door that you can sign. If you would like more information, we do stream our 11:15 service in the forum, so even if you're not local, you can have access to that. And if you need a restroom, there are some through this room into the hallway, and also in the trailer outside. And on the welcome table, we have a red welcome bag, if you're new, that's chock full of information about All Saints community and how you can be connected to this place of inclusive love. This Sunday, and every Sunday, we put our faith into action, and we are asking you to sign a letter to the local grocery store chains, calling on them to bargain honestly and in good faith with grocery store workers and their union. An estimated 60% of grocery store workers currently are forced to work 2 or more jobs to make ends meet. And it is immoral that 10% of grocery store workers are homeless. Grocery store workers deserve living wages that enable them to support their families, quality and affordable health care, and secure retirement. So please stop by our action table on the lawn on your way out this morning and sign the letter. In addition, we have information on the action table if you'd like to help those families who've been impacted by the ice raids in Mississippi. There's information on how to do that. And also on our table today, before you leave, there is a flyer that includes the save the dates for the training of trauma-informed care, community-based care, and also a sign-up sheet for you to leave your information. We'll put you on a list. Registration for this is going to open September 1. And now it is truly a joy and honor to introduce to you Dr. Brinell Anderson. Brinell is originally from Houston, Texas, and she is a licensed clinical psychologist, a graduate of George Fox University. She also, in her bachelor's, had a double major in psychology and ethnic studies. She has a master's in community psychology as well as clinical psychology and a doctorate in clinical psychology. She is a lifelong learner. Any of you who know her, you learn that very quickly. She has completed 2 years of adult psychoanalytic psychotherapy training. She has been trained as a facilitator for emotional emancipation circles for people of African descent to address the impact of internalized depression. In 2015, she participated in an inaugural leadership training for a national racial reconciliation organization, Coming to the Table. She also has postdoctoral training in health psychology with a focus on HIV mental health from Harvard UCLA, and a certificate training on strategies for trauma awareness and resilience, the STAR program, which she will be talking about today. I would add she's also taught on the doctoral level, and she is a part-time clinical associate professor of psychiatry at the Keck School of Medicine at USC, and she has a private practice here in Pasadena. And lastly, she has a weekly vlog on YouTube that's entitled Beloved Blackness, where she addresses the beauty and richness of the African cultural tradition and legacy. And I can't express enough how grateful I am and humbled by the way God works, that Brinell and I cross paths here at All Saints Church. We have a mutual passion for healing from trauma, community psychology, and the interface of spirituality, psychology, and healing, and particularly community healing. So without any more words from me, can we please welcome Dr. Brinell Anderson.
you. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on us, because the Lord has anointed us to proclaim good news to the poor. God has sent us to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. Instead of your shame, you will receive a double portion. And instead of disgrace, you will rejoice in your inheritance. And everlasting joy will be yours. Amen. Ashe, amen. So I want to first thank God and the ancestors. I was thinking about often when we reference our ancestors, we say we're standing on the shoulders of those who've come before us. And that actually has a hierarchical feel to it, right? And an African-centered worldview is the ancestors encircle us, they support us, they undergird us, and surround us in what God has called us to do. And so I'm honored today to be a part of that circle, the great cloud of witnesses, and to have joined and partnered with Reverend Sally, as she said, is nothing but God that has brought us together at this particular point in human history, and I'm grateful. I want to first talk about how this particular project idea got started. It's been a couple of years, and I'm so glad Jasmine is here, because she and Dr. Amy Tahani Bitmeshki are connected to how the ideas around this training evolved or developed 2 years ago. So January 2017, I received a call from my colleague, comrade, and good friend, Dr. Amy Tahani Bitmeshki, and she was doing work with Black Lives Matter Pasadena. And there was a call because there was community violence that had taken place, and the youth were having a hard time processing the pain of their grief, the losses. And so I worked to get a couple of graduate students, African-American graduate students in psychology, to come and hold space for them at one of their meetings. And so out of that, I started to have ideas like, how can we get more African-American mental health practitioners involved to offer community-based care? So one notion I had was, how about we get maybe 10 or 12 licensed clinicians to come out once a month, do a training in the community in partnership with Black Lives Matter Pasadena, and the leadership was on board with that, but we just couldn't get it off of the ground. Then I thought, well, let's see what's already in existence. And so I reached out to Dr. Ted Kosey, and he at the time was at Fuller Psychological Center. He's now the dean at the Psychological School. And so I reached out to him to see, is it possible to get any of the African-American trainees to actually go into the community, into the homes, but there were liability concerns for that. So I'm persistent, so we're never going to stop, right? So if the community has a need, we're going to figure out how to meet that need. So here we are 2 years later saying, how can we meet the needs of the community and pair and partner with All Saints Church pastoral care, healing, and health ministry. And so our hope is that this project remains and continues to stay connected to its origins. It's really important to me to allow the needs of the community as they get expressed contemporarily, right now, to hear from the community as we inform how we will execute this project, okay? So I have ideas around the underpinnings of this project, ideas in which I can offer as a clinical psychologist with a community psychology background. However, it's important for the community to inform how to be able to meet the needs that are existent right now. So to honor the origins from which the idea came, we want to honor throughout the process how it gets executed, okay? So often when we think of outreach, or even mission, so to speak, within a Christian context, we think of those who are within, who have something, go out and go give it, right? And I want us to flip that upside down. It's important for us to equip those who are in the community to be able to serve the community. All right? So I want us to think about this whole idea of trauma-informed community-based care as not just the parishioners within All Saints Church will be equipped to understand trauma on many levels, but that we are going to be equipping community participants to be able to then serve the communities. Okay? So we're not trying to create a sense of dependency on us as if we have something that only we have and we're not willing to offer that then can be transformed and offered to the community. We want to give what we have to empower the community. I'm kind of preaching now. To empower the community in order to serve the community's needs. All right? Amen. So, I can't help myself. So first, we, like Reverend Sally says, we have some flyers with the dates, and so I'll briefly mention, we're going to have 2 training opportunities. One is a half-day training that will be on the second Saturday in October, October 12th, from 9 to 1. So that's just a little appetizer, okay? And it's for those to come out, get a little taste of what we'll be offering for the full weekend training, which will be the weekend of MLK weekend, okay? So it'll be January 17th through 19th, that Friday from 6 to 9, Saturday, 8:30 to 5, Sunday, 2:30 to 5:30. We know that's a commitment of time, and so we assume that if you're willing to commit that time, you're committed to the journey, okay? And so I know that sometimes things come up with people say, I can't make it this day, I can't. We're asking anyone who's going to participate to commit to the 3 days of the training. We know, of course, if an emergency comes up, we'd be understanding and compassionate towards that, but we would want you to clear your calendar if you want to commit to receiving the full training, to be there both Friday evening, all day Saturday, and then Sunday afternoon. So let's talk some about the goals of the project. So I'm going to identify these goals and then kind of speak a little bit more to them. So some of the goals would be to identify different types of trauma, to explore the whole person impact of trauma, mind, body, spirit, relationships, emotions, understand the historical and cultural trauma, both of those including systemic and structural trauma, learn how unresolved trauma commences the cycles of violence, explore personal and collective trauma healing strategies, explore resilience in response to trauma. Identify ways in which All Saints community can address trauma within the greater Pasadena area, specifically Northwest Pasadena. And finally, train parishioners and community participants to become what we're referencing as trauma healing advocates, okay? So this training is going to educate and train participants in understanding trauma, but the focus is going to be specifically tailored on understanding the trauma faced by persons of African descent. So the hope is to bring persons from local churches, particularly black churches within the area, to train leadership, to train lay counselors within those congregations, so that they can be able to provide trauma-informed care to their congregations as well as surrounding communities. Additionally, obviously, those who are in attendance, if that's not the population you feel called to serve, the attendees will have the opportunity to take the information from the training, because you're going to have important information that will be given to you about trauma, and discern how to apply it to the communities in which you find yourselves. Okay? So let me speak a little bit more about some ideas I have around how I'm putting together the training and what theoretical underpinnings are supporting it. And those 3 are community psychology, the STAR training, which is strategies for trauma awareness and resilience, and African-centered psychology. So I want to take time today and go through all 3 of those and spend maybe a little bit time on the third one, African-centered psychology. This is giving you a taste. So I said before, the half day is appetizer. What would this be called? Your salad? Say it again. Yes, I love it. So let's talk about community psychology. So community psychology as a discipline looks at all psychological problems occurring within societal and environmental contexts. So systems are really important when it comes to community psychologists. The idea is that the welfare and development of the community is what we focus on. So oftentimes individual, more psychotherapy or clinical psychology or even counseling psychology can come from a pathological model. Community psychologists don't think about things through the lens of pathology. Community psychologists thinks about things from the area of strengths. So we look at what are the pre-existing strengths that are already there within a community, and we want to build and support and fortify those strengths. Also, what's important within community psychology is to empower the community. So similar to what I'm saying in regards to this outreach, we want to empower communities by valuing the historical and cultural context from which and in which the communities find themselves, right? So not only are we looking at the current systems in which the community interacts with, but we're also looking at the systems of how history, culture, socio-cultural, historical experiences impact communities currently. So that's going to be something really unique, if I have to say, that I know I will be bringing to the training, is giving you the opportunity to think about things, not just if you think of a race, not just thinking of where are people in the current line of the race itself, the progression of the race, but what has happened before you took that snapshot of the race. Okay? One of my mentors, Baba Kobe Cambone, always emphasized that when there's a pathology focus for the African American community, there's always a focus on, well, why are you here? And everybody else is up here. But, well, we need to look at where the race started, okay? And so African-centered psychologists would say not just where the race started in terms of the impact of oppression, but where the race started in terms of being the founders of civilization and humanity, okay? And so part of what I'll talk about later in terms of African-centered psychology is not just being reactive to oppression or white supremacy domination, but understand the cultural essence and historical legacy of what it means to be a person of African descent, okay? The second model is the STAR model. The uniqueness of the STAR model really parallels when I went through a week-long training that the Eastern Mennonite University Center for Justice and Peace Building offers. When I went through their training, what struck me, I've gone through tons of trauma trainings as a psychologist. What struck me was the focus wasn't on the individual or solely on the individual. And so it was the only training I had ever been to where they actually talked about historical harms and cultural trauma, historical trauma, dignity violations, ways in which I had thought about things but had not been focused within a trauma-informed lens in that particular way. What the STAR model does, so they talk about trauma being a wounding, okay, and that we all can experience something that others would use the term and say that's traumatic. However, what's important is to understand the term of traumagenic, which means you as a person or the community's resources are actually tapped based on a response to whatever that particular event is, okay? So one person's experience of something that may be traumatic may not be the same as another person's experience of what may be traumatic. So their response may be traumagenic, right? Which means that whatever that particular trauma energy, how it impacts your body, your mind, your relationships, that there needs to be a way of offering support and safety in order to work through that particular unhealed or unprocessed trauma energy. Also, the uniqueness of the STAR model is they emphasize that the cycles of violence can come from unresolved trauma. And so they talk about, and we're going to talk about during the training, the cycles of acting in and the cycles of acting out. So some examples of acting in could be you're finding yourself sleeping more than usual. You're finding yourself not wanting to go to work or interacting with your peers as much after you've experienced something that's traumagenic. For acting out, it may be that you find yourself engaging in more reckless behavior than usual. Or you may find yourself getting more irritable, taking things out on people who are close to you. Those are signs of acting out. And so what we hope to do is, through the training, identify and offer psychoeducation around those cycles of violence, and then to be able to discuss how to get out of those cycles of violence. And what's really important and what the STAR model emphasizes is the need for safety and support as the first step in breaking free. So this is important while we're thinking about outreach the way we are with this model, because if you think about the cultural historical legacy of enslavement, of oppression, of anti-blackness, not just in our society, but also locally, if we have persons from our parish that go out that do not represent the community, particularly persons from the dominant group, is that going to create a sense of safety and support and security? Right? So we have to be strategic and mindful of not re-injuring communities that have already been traumatized, even with good intentions. Okay? Another piece of the STAR model is it's important to find healthy ways to release that blocked and unhealed trauma energy, but also to help return people to a state of resilience. That notion doesn't support a sense of victimhood, right? That we all have a sense of resilience. Our communities have a sense of resilience. So it's really important we're returning people to a state of resilience. We're not bestowing upon them resilience. Their belovedness, their dignity, their worth, their value, that's already inherent within them as persons and then within communities. We are helping to restore them to a place of resilience to connect to that support, that love, that care that already is there, okay? So there are ways that I'm hoping through the training to even challenge some implicit and unconscious ways in which we may think about offering care, being of support, mission, outreach, all of those, that hopefully will challenge how you want to think about being of service, all right? You have to first think about and locate service within yourself before you're actually able to give it, right? And be mindful of what that looks like. The other piece that the STAR model emphasizes, so I talked about the need to break free from the trauma by finding safety and support, but also emphasizes the context of the cultural historical piece. Dr. Wade Nobles uses the term psychic terrorism. He defines it as any act or thought designed to immobilize and or destabilize one's basic sense of security and safety by assaulting one's sense of self or identity. I'm going to repeat that. Psychic terrorism is any act or thought designed to immobilize and or destabilize one's basic sense of security and safety by assaulting one's sense of self or identity. And what we hope to do in terms of incorporating this notion around in the STAR model and take in consideration psychic terrorism is we have to think about how to create safety on all those different layers that consider structural trauma, that consider historical harms, the impact of enslavement, all of that on the people of African descent. That leads us to the third underpinning, African-centered psychology. The Association of Black Psychologists was formed actually in 1968 in response to the American Psychological Association, not speaking specifically and uniquely to the needs of the Black community, and actually viewing the field and suggesting that the field as a whole was tending to humans, this universal way of thinking about things, a place of autonomy, very individualistic, that actually was coming from a Eurocentric worldview, but was causing harm and damage because our communities were needing help to understand the trauma of what it meant in the 60s to be going through the things that our community was going through. So out of that, the Association of Black Psychologists was formed in a reaction to, okay? And eventually, the discipline of Black psychology was formed. And many of the theories that formed at that time in terms of cultural, racial identities were still in reaction to oppression, in reaction to. Over time, the discipline shifted into African-centered psychology because the idea was if we are always in a state of reaction, it's as if we have no sense of ourselves culturally as a people of having an essence that already existed before white supremacy domination. Okay? So African-centered psychology helps to ground people of African descent and give those who were not of African descent an understanding, a lens in which to view and understand cultural identity. So I know a few times I've talked about that a couple of times in my sermons in terms of this notion of individual identity. Often when we think about people, we only think about people through an individualistic lens. I want to invite you to start to have more of an informed way of thinking about identity as layered. And one of those layers is our cultural identity. So in bringing African-centered psychology to the trauma training, we are hoping to make space to speak to the unique needs, issues, and conditions of the Black community from a frame that, yes, addresses oppression, but also that delineates specific African philosophical concepts that underpin an African worldview, all right? So Dr. Naeem Akbar talks about the reason that we need a Black psychology or African-centered psychology is one, a tool of liberation, and two, a tool of healing. Liberation from those things that constrain us as a community and people for being able to define and affirm who we are within ourselves, okay? A tool of healing because we've experienced the ma'afa. Dr. Marimba Ani uses that word ma'afa, which is a key Swahili word that means great disaster and destruction beyond human comprehension and convention. Okay? In the past, some people would say the African Holocaust, but that's using another group's experience to try to define our experience, which is unique. So if you're looking at scholars say between 40 to 100 million Africans died through the Ma'afa, we have to put that into context of human history and the impact of that, not just on resources, the impact continentally, but the impact psychologically and on resources here for Africans within the diaspora. Okay? So part of what I'm hoping to do is to bring this awareness to people who want to see themselves serving, but also people who are already serving Northwest Pasadena, the people within Northwest Pasadena. So this idea of tools, so that's a tool of liberation. How are we going to get liberated so we can get back connected and affirm who we are as a people? Now, the tool of healing is response to the ma'afa. The ma'afa is a trauma. We have to find ways to deal with it as a trauma. Okay, we've had Brian Stevenson here, and he's talked about the importance of the museum, the memorial that he has, and that's such an important memorializing, an important piece, and even the STAR model talks about that. The importance of being able to say, this is truth. This truth impacts us. We have to face the truth in order to be able to heal from it. We can't have a festering wound and put a Band-Aid over and pretend it's not a festering wound, okay? So one thing that Dr. Linda James Myers, who's an African-centered psychologist, talks about, if we want to think about African-centered psychology as a tool of healing, she goes through the 5 phases of oppression, all right? So these are the ways in which we need to have healing in response to these 5 phases. The first phase is the physical survival of the oppressed is maintained in the hands of the oppressor through dehumanization and terrorization. The physical survival. So I'm not just talking about in the past, I'm talking about now. The physical survival, okay, of the oppressed is kept in the hands of the oppressor through both dehumanization and terrorization. Secondly, people are denied access. Those who are oppressed are denied access to their cultural history and traditions, okay? So the first, the physical survival, is kept in the hands of the oppressor through dehumanization, terrorization. The next is you're denied access to your cultural history. The third is the cultural history is negated as if it never existed. So I'm talking about the origins of the Association of Black Psychologists in response to the American Psychological Association. It's like, wait a minute, there's some other groups' experiences here that are not being acknowledged. So the cultural history and legacy and traditions are negated as if they ever existed. The fourth phase is the history of the oppressor is then elevated and made to appear to be normal and universal, okay? Lastly, there's divide and conquer that then starts to happen within the oppressed. To get the oppressed to believe in the history and tradition of the oppressor, to have them then internalize and then start to act out in a divide and conquer way so that those traditions, whether it's individualism or materialism or consumerism, become things to fight for. So that those without privilege then try to fight for what hasn't been bestowed upon them by the oppressor. Okay? So in thinking about this purpose of African-centered psychology as a tool of liberation and tool of healing, our hope is for this trauma training to address all those layers. I know I've said a mouthful in this. I'm looking at the time. There's some more I want to say about it too. Okay. So part of the healing of the training will be we're going to offer some culturally rooted and congruent self and community care strategies. So in alignment with the STAR model, which says, hey, resilience and self-care is really important, well, one of the things the STAR model doesn't do is specifically bring about and talk about culturally congruent ways in which we can do that. The Community Healing Network partnered with the Association of Black Psychologists, and they have not just the emotional emancipation circles, which we have some people in the room who've been trained on that I'm hoping we'll bring to the community, but also they have this community self-care toolkit. It's called the Family Care, Community Care, and Self-Care Toolkit, Healing in the Face of Cultural Trauma. You can find it online, Community Healing Network, partnered with the Association of Black Psychologists. What I'm hoping to do is to integrate that toolkit. It's already in existence, no need to reinvent the wheel, but to make it palatable and understandable so that we can have that toolkit all throughout the community. Not a single household doesn't have access to that toolkit. Somebody who doesn't have internet, we didn't print it out and given it to them, okay? Dr. Shelley Harrell, who's a Pepperdine University professor, I just heard her 2 years in a row talk about African-centered contemplative practices, and I love what she's doing with this whole notion of mindfulness that has taken root, that no one but her, I've heard so far, that's anchoring it, specifically, uniquely in an African-centered way. So she has what she's calling the soul approach, and the SOUL stands for soulfulness-oriented, unitive, and liberatory. And when I tell you she has put some details together about how to be able to execute soul approaches and contemplative practices that are culturally congruent, whether it's using music, using poems, using spoken word pieces, like it's very African-centered, so we're going to incorporate that into the training. So you all may be saying, well, what's this idea of African-centered? I don't quite understand. Aren't we all people? Yeah, we are. And we all have unique cultural identities. And so I'm going to focus a little bit on what that looks like in terms of some of the worldview. So the idea of an African cultural worldview is one in which consubstantiation is emphasized. And that word, when they're using it, Dr. Nobles coined this word. He's an African-centered scholar. He has an institute in San Francisco. He talks about that at the essence of all things is spirit. So when we looked at, and those black psychologists looked at the discipline, the APA of psychology, the APA was purporting, spirit was nowhere in existence. Anybody of African descent was like, well, how spirit is not in this? Right? We're alive because we know spirit exists. And that we were called and formed to be more than what circumstances, the material, was emphasizing. Okay? And so this notion of consubstantiation then allows us to know that everything is interconnected. All right? So if in everything is spirit, there's interconnection. There's a relatedness. There's harmony. And then there's the need to then respect that connection. So that connection can mean the connection from here, in terms of you with the divine, from which the spirit comes, the connection with person to person, the connection with nature, and a reverence for that. There's even what's considered within African-centered ways of thinking about the connection with time. So those children who are yet to be born, I'm connected to them. Those persons who've already transcended, I'm connected to them. So there's a circle of life that those who haven't yet come here, I'm already connected to them, right? It's a African self-extension orientation is what Baba Kobe would call it, okay? And that those who have already transitioned are serving to bring about the purpose and liberation of African people. So they're in the spirit realm working on that. Ashe? Yes. And so the other emphasis of African-centered worldview is that the beginning of all knowledge is self-knowledge. So you have to have an awareness of what I just described. You got to go through something to be able to know that your ancestors are undergirding you. You have to go through something to know that there was something that was placed in you before you even came here that needs to be able to be brought out. Okay? That's African-centered. There's also this notion that Dr. Linda James Myers talks about when she talks about diunital logic. As opposed to dichotomous, this us, them, either or way of thinking about things that often psychology as a whole focuses on. We talk about diunital logic, which means the good and bad can coexist side by side. All right? Dark and light, all needed. And lastly, there's two things. There's a responsibility to protect the most vulnerable, so whether that's the elders or the children, that comes from an African-centered lens, as well as the responsibility to grow into what's referred to as perfectibility, an emphasis on transformation. And so the ancient Kemites, they wrote about this. They talked about the principles of Ma'at, that we're all to be living into. We get to a period of time that when your soul is done, when your body is done, and the soul has to be weighed against the feather Ma'at, that Ma'at feather that's representing those 7 principles, truth, justice, reciprocity, harmony, all of those principles, and it's saying, where's the perfectibility? Are you ready to transform and transcend to the next realm? Okay, so our ancestors were thinking about these things. They had layers of the soul, which they called the saku. So the word psychology, they say it comes from the Greek word psyche, actually comes from the Kemetic word saku, right? And so there's a need to illuminate the spirit. And it wasn't about just the mind here. Saku represented the spirit, okay? And that they understood the soul as having different layers. Now, this is before Western psychology was even in existence. I'm talking about the ancient Kemites. Thought about the soul in layers. The ba, the ka, all these different layers of the soul in which they said in order to be able to get to that top layer, then you're ready. It's time for you to transition. You done made it. It's perfectibility. Transformation is always the goal and emphasis. So with that in mind, there's a song, speaking of connection. Yesterday I was walking the Rose Bowl, and I'm like, man, I keep seeing these butterflies all around. And butterflies always is symbolic to me. If I could have a tattoo, it would be of a butterfly. But I can't have a tattoo for like other physical reasons. And if I could have a tattoo, it would be a butterfly because I always felt like the butterfly symbolized transformation before I even had a sense of anything African-centered. I love butterflies. So I'm seeing all these butterflies flying around while I'm taking my walk. I'm like, what's going on? Okay, God, ancestors, what are y'all trying to say to me? Get a call from a friend earlier that day. So let me call her back. I'm talking to her. She's like, girl, you need to listen to Denise Williams' Black Butterfly. That's something in that song that's coming to me right now. I'm talking about interconnection. Staying open, right? She calls me based on another need. I'm calling her back based on that need. Then I'm telling her about today. And she's like, What? Oh, yeah, you need to listen to it. So we're going to listen to it together in light of what I just spoke about. So that's the transformation we're anticipating. Yes.
Thank you. I want to talk just briefly about how this fits into our core values of radical inclusion and courageous justice. As we bring trauma awareness into our community, we will be better prepared to welcome and understand, particularly those people most likely to be traumatized by our culture. And that in and of itself helps us become more inclusive and welcoming, and also to continue to be aware of our radical interconnectedness. That is the fact of the universe. And we live, and dominant culture would say otherwise. It is courageous because when you begin to talk about trauma, you face your own, and you face the ways that unintended, perhaps, you've participated in traumatizing others. And so we're going to do this together and learn and hold each other in the process of recognizing both how we've been traumatized and how we participate unintended, sometimes by just what we don't know or choose not to know. The root of religion is bringing together, the word is bringing together what has been torn apart. And trauma tears people apart, internally, in communities, in families. And this gives us an opportunity to be even greater agents of healing, of bringing back things together that have been torn apart. So I strongly encourage you to sign up for the trainings, and we want to open it now to questions and comments from the audience.
First here and then
This is not.
make sure this works.
Thank you.
Test?
Thank you. You spoke about traumagenic, and what I thought I might have heard from your explanation was something like triggering, but maybe not.
So when we say traumagenic, think of something that happens when it's trauma, when it's traumatic, there's a wounding. Everybody's wounded differently, okay? So somebody's wounding may not tap all of their internal resources or the community's resources, but when something's traumagenic, it has tapped the resources. You're welcome.
I'm Karen Smith. I'm with Lay Counseling here. And how does this program fit in with the other ministries that Sally oversees and that we serve our greater population?
Well, first of all, you may not know this yet, but we are asking and close to requiring the lay counseling ministry to be a part of the training, and I don't think that will be a problem. I think people will want to do it. And, you know, this project is going to develop by listening to the community. And so what role our ministries are going to have, we don't know yet, because that has to come from the community listening to what the community needs, but and what we can do, right?
Along that line, could you say a little bit more of the kind of people that might be most useful to the project in terms of walking with others and helping to possibly mentor others who themselves will be doing the trauma work? You know, or do you have in mind both lay and professionals? And you're pretty open, it sounds like, to whomever wants to commit themselves to it.
Definitely. So as Reverend Sally said, that we're hoping that those who are already presently lay counselors will have this training, because it's going to be important, and you can utilize the information, even though we're going to be specifically targeting and building upon an outreach that will reach Northwest Pasadena. We want people to know that there will be information that you can glean from the training that's going to help you no matter what populations you may be serving who are experiencing trauma. So it can be professionals, because a lot of the information that I'll share, I uniquely have been blessed to be in settings that have helped me think about these things, and they aren't necessarily within traditional academic environments talking about African-centered psychology or the STAR model for training. And so I want to bring that uniqueness that even people who may be professional mental health providers, they can actually gain something different that they may not have been able to have the opportunity to gain from other academic contexts.
This is more of a statement and not a question. Since you guys are going to be in Northwest Pasadena, I think I'm going to speak for Northwest Pasadena, and we want folks who are open, but also, like she was saying, that realize that people have come into our community, white people, and they have triggered us. They have come and came with these same ideas, and then left folks just like alienated, isolated, and feeling in despair. So I want you guys to like work on that own inner racism, inner, like, because everybody has it. You know what I'm saying? Everybody has it. So we're going to be keeping 100. Yeah. So, work on that inner racism, because you can say little things like that trauma person, like trigger, and the response will be like crazy. Like, you know what I mean? So I'm just speaking for Northwest.
Thanks, Jasmine.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Someone over here.
Where, did you point someone?
I thought he had a
Oh,
question.
Marsha, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. I'm really pleased to see the awareness being spread and this information happening. I'd just like to point out what I think would be a need to make sure in your training is the basics of what trauma-informed care is that could be really understood by the group. And I point this out because I invited today a guest, Mary Donnelly Crocker, who is the executive director of Young and Healthy. And Young and Healthy is training all of the employees at Huntington Memorial Hospital, is training the university, or the Pasadena Unified School District, starting the training through all of the teachers, and they're mostly focused on the youth. But there is some wonderful basic training and definitions of what trauma-informed care is that I think would be helpful to add to, perhaps how you're presenting all of this, to just help people get grounded in what that's meaning and what the experience has been in this community. So I thank you for bringing this forward. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for people to get engaged.
Thank you. I may not have been clear. The STAR model specifically addresses different types of trauma, how to be able to think about trauma, the different layers of trauma. But one thing that it brings that's unique that I'm not quite sure how the trauma-informed care is being put or executed within Young and Healthy is the layers of community trauma, historical trauma, structural trauma. So yes, of course, you'll be able to, you'll get all of the basic foundations of trauma. So that will be included for sure. But what we're hoping is that we're offering something unique that incorporates understanding trauma from a lens that most community organizations are not thinking about trauma through these lenses.
Right. Yeah. So we're at 11 o'clock right now. So I know the people. I see the sign-up sheets right here. So if you want to sign up for this right now, you can sign up for it here. We're going to be figuring out a way. It'll be also we'll have it in the Connection Center on successive Sundays, and we probably also want to find a way to do this online, that people can sign up online for this. So we'll get that done. But for now, you can sign up here. Next Sunday and the Sunday after, you'll be able to sign up at the Connection Center. Can we say thank you to Brinell Anderson and Sally Howard?